Cutter's rise has been meteoric, the number of trophies taken down historic, with competitive players calling for bans, other archetypes favored by their stands. Which deck will break the blockade, or will the merits of Standard's glory fade?
It only harmonizes if it wins prizes. Comment below as we walk through the 6th week of Dragonstorm Standard. Ooh, alrighty folks, RC Hartford has come and gone, leaving us with a pile of data to sort through as we tabulate LCQs, MTGO challenges, and the regional championship itself. We went through 18 major tournaments this past weekend, and Izzet Cutter, by the numbers, still dominant, accounting for 54 top 8 slots and 9 trophies. That's right, while it may not have taken down RC Hartford, it still took down half of all major tournaments this past weekend, leaving it as the number 1 spot on our tier list and public enemy number 1 throughout Tarkir.
No doubt, no doubt. Still public enemy number 1, but Mono Red Aggro did take down RC Hartford and snag 2 trophies overall, with 9 top 8 spots total. Now, while it didn't put up nearly the numbers of Cutter, it was a sneaky good pick going into this tournament, and we'll talk more about why in our tier list breakdown.
Omni Combo came in 3rd with 4 trophies and 15 top 8 spots this past weekend. Turns out ending the game on turn 4 is usually enough to beat Cutter.
Rounding out tier 1 is Jeskai Oculus with 13 top 8 spots and 2 trophies of its own. The Eye in the Sky was our guild mage's choice going into the weekend, and while it didn't quite pan out as expected, it's good to know that this was a strong choice nonetheless. It should be noted that of the 18 trophies, we've now accounted for 17 in just these top 4 archetypes alone.
Kicking off tier 2, we have Orzhov Pixies with 8 top 8 spots, but not a trophy in sight. The hard hedge against Cutter lost some points as Cutter adapted to grind through and the other archetypes were ready for some pixie nonsense as usual.
Jeskai Dragons made it to the 6th place on our tier list with 5 top 8s but no trophies. Given that the best control list abandoned red in favor of a stricter Azorius list and made it to the finals of RC Hartford, the move might be to unsleeve those Shikos and bring back the classics instead.
7th place went to Dimir Tempo with 5 top 8s and 0 trophies also. Shout out to Rebellion member Cody with a K for making day 2 of RC Hartford with his build. Props, buddy.
Oh yeah, good work, man. Rounding out tier 2, we have Zur Domain with 4 top 8s but 0 trophies. Zur and friends just couldn't find a path through the tide of Cutter despite every lockdown available. That doesn't tell you the strength of the deck, Cutter that is. I don't really know what will.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I'm going to show you some variants on popular archetypes with Grixis Oculus and Orzhov Midrange.
And I'll be showcasing Bant, Enchantress, and Mardu Control. But first, let's storm on over to our tier list breakdowns, starting with Izzet Cutter.
Julian Corfine made it to the semifinals of RC Hartford before falling short of the prize, and let's look at where this archetype ended up. Now, first and foremost, gang, you're seeing a 4-2 split of Slickshot and Drake Hatcher. I know there's plenty of people that are on, you play 4 Hatchers in the main, 3 Slickshots in the sideboard, but at the end of the day, you can't just hedge for the mirror. You have to be ready for the other decks like Omni Combo, like Oculus, all the stuff that you just need burst damage at a high level, right? And this version of the deck did that. I like that it also played the 21st land instead of the potentially 4th Monstrous Rage or 2nd Spell Pierce, depending on how we look at it. The need for consistency in getting to that 3rd land for stock up is critical. And this deck acknowledged that, and it said we're playing 15 rounds of Magic. We're not missing land drops. We are not going to short sell ourselves there and lose games because of it. The 3-1 split of Torch the Tower to Burst Lightning, also a great call. All right, you want the torches, you have a lot of ways to bargain to kill opposing Drake Hatchers, but sometimes you got to kill a Preacher of the Schism, and sometimes you just got to dome them in the face. So that split right there, that's really well done.
Now we come towards the end of the season. We're not there quite yet. We still got a little bit more time to go, but we come towards the end of the season. We see Cutter's dominance. So we've gotten a lot of chances to talk about this deck, to ask questions about it. So I'm pretty much at the end of my rope here, and I got to ask the one question: is it a time for a ban on Corey Steel Cutter itself, or one of the supporting cards like Stock Up, Talent, or Rage even?
I mean, you get down to it, Max, and if you ban one card, you're going to have to ban so many more because, Cutter is kind of holding Pixie in check at this point. That's one of the main reasons Esper Pixies fell off. And before that, we saw how dominant Pixies was. So then you look at, okay, what card is shared between the two? Storm Chaser's Talent. That's probably where I would start the ban so that we get rid of a lot of different pieces for multiple archetypes, right? We start with talent, we probably look at rage, we probably look at stock up. But at a certain point, I look at it and I say, let's ban 10 cards or let's ban 0. You know, like, let's either get rid of all the engines and reset the format and let us see what comes when you do a major shakeup and we lose, you know, beans, when we lose things that Pixie needs, when we lose things from all the major archetype players, then it becomes more interesting. And if we're not going to do that, you know, we can also just leave it alone, because we've got, you know, Final Fantasy coming in, we've got rotation coming in August. Like, there aren't major standard events between now and then. I think the next major standard event is in Orlando in August, right? And that's post rotation, post Edge of Eternity's dropping. So we've got 2 whole sets before the next major event. That tells me we're probably not going to see any bans.
You're likely right. Unfortunately, for all those people out there looking for the ban hammer, I hesitate to say that, though, because we have seen Wizards pull the late ban before, where it's just like 2 weeks left to play, they'll ban the 1 card and see how things shake out anyway. I don't know. They've done some odd things. They've made some choices I don't quite understand. But I think ultimately you're right. If there is a ban, it's going to have to be several cards belonging to several archetypes just to really shake things up, not just, you know, play favorites. So I'm with you on that. But let's go ahead and shift over to another deck. We thought for a while this deck was going to see a ban, right, with Rage. But let's talk about Mono Red Aggro.
Charmander won RC Hartford with Mono Red Aggro, slogging through 929 players in a 2-day grind that included no small number of Izzet Cutter matchups. So why did this build of red work so well? Well, first, remember a few weeks back, about a month back, when I said a smooth curve and an optimized mana base go a long way in a 2-day tournament? Well, look at this curve and look at that mana base. That is as smooth as it gets, right? Second, Mage Bane Lizard, hedge in the main. Of all the ways that you could hedge and deal with Cutter, we were all trying to figure out what the best hate piece was, right? We're like, is it High Noon? You know, is it Lockdown? And it turns out Into the Floodmaw really made a mockery of trying to just put the brakes on permanently. The answer, and the one that Mono Red addressed here, is you counterpunch it. You force them to take the damage to try to deal with what you're doing, and you make sure that whatever they're bouncing with Into the Floodmaw is only 1 mana more than the Floodmaw itself, so that you don't have a mana disparity issue. And this build did such a great job of that. I just want to acknowledge the brilliance of that design.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about Mage Bane Lizard for weeks. Glad somebody followed through with that, and ultimately it paid off for them, right? But my question, now, the deck does kind of, like you're pointing out about the mana curve, very nice mana curve. Deck feels airtight for the current meta, at least. You know, it feels almost solved. I almost want to use that word. I love seeing a 23rd land in the sideboard just in case they go up the curve, right? Now, you don't see that too often nowadays, but is that advisable for where red is positioned right now with the need for, you know, say Sunspine Link sometimes? You know, you typically don't see that. Do we want that 23rd land in the sideboard?
Absolutely. I mean, that is just an old pro move. It's a classic. It's something that people have not done a lot of recently. They seem to just be on higher variants, you know, where they're like, we have Sunspine Links in 22 lands, and if we flood, it's great, and if we don't, it's stuck in our hand, and we're willing to accept that. And this is an old school pro mentality where you're like, absolutely not. If we're playing 4-drops, we're going to play 23 lands. We're not going to play that risk, because otherwise, why play the 4-drop in the first place? So now this is a throwback to an old era where statistics were followed a little bit more heavily and luck was relied on a little bit less. And I'm here for it.
Hey, call us boomers if you want, but there's something to be said about the way that things were done when, you know, statistics did matter. Those numbers, those rates, your mana base, that all mattered. You know, long before you think about where the flex slots go, you want to think about having a solid mana base. So yeah, I same advice here. I think that's very genius. Let's go ahead and move on to another deck. A little complex deck with its play lines, the way it shifts. Let's talk about Omni Combo.
Ryan Mullins took down the 38-player oversized card event at SCG Hartford with Omni Combo and has a unique take, and that's part of why I selected this list, Max, over the other ones that were available. I don't think we need to see another run-of-the-mill Omni Combo list. We want some innovation. This list had that, all right? We got to see Steam Core Scholar finally make an appearance in this. There's 4 counterspells in the main of this. There's 2 Get Lost. There's a Clay-Fired Bricks. What there isn't? Confounding Riddle, Moment of Truth. Nowhere to be seen here, right? So I like where this list is going as well. This is acknowledging that you do want to see more cards, so you have Steam Core Scholar, right? But you also need a presence. There needs to be a reliable creature plan. Post-board especially, in Steam Core, gives you that hedge pre-board into post-board. So I like where they went there. I love the 3 Enduring Curiosities. That's such a difficult card to deal with, especially when your opponents are going to look at their Torch to the Towers and go, nah, we don't need those post-board. And then you just put a Curiosity into play and punish the hell out of them for it. So it's interesting here. I love that it looks like an Omni Oculus mix to a degree.
Right. I see the flankers. I see the Enduring Curiosity. Very cool, very cool. And we advised y'all last week, I think weeks prior as well, be wary of Omni Combo post board. Different game plan. I love seeing this shift towards a creature based threat, diversifying the threat base, always good. But my question, should we be looking at an Omni build that aims to use the Profs engine? I mean, you kind of mentioned how it's almost like half Oculus. Should we go that full route?
I think it's possible that we start looking at Omni Combo and considering, what if we did that? What if we rebuilt it in a half of Oculus, but instead of Helping Hand into Oculus, you're doing Abuelos into Omni. You could do that. And I don't think you need to have red in that color scheme either, so the mana base gets easier. So I'd love to see some more experimentation here. You're in a deck that wants to see a lot of cards. You don't necessarily have to use Moment of Truth. You could just use hardcore draw engines like Steam Core Scholar. And there are other ones available between blue and white that you could also look at. Winter Night Stories, not necessarily a bad call, especially if you're going to play Profts. So I don't know. I don't have an issue with it. I've definitely played enough Omni Combo at this point that I can tell you that I don't love not having a good plan B. It was the same issue Oculus used to have before it got the Profts engine. And I feel like Omni Combo has that to a degree, where your plan A is amazing, but your plan A is also easy to disrupt. So you want potentially that plan B that Profts offers. And that's really where I ended up with it.
It's worked out for Oculus. Why not for another deck? And, you could even name it, Prof's Eidetic Memory makes him omniscient. Prof's Omniscience. I love it. It already works out. Anyway, let's move to talking about the deck we just mentioned. Let's talk about Jeskai Oculus.
Sky Mason won the 30-player second LCQ of SCG Hartford with Jeskai Oculus taking down Orzhov Pixies in the finals. Given that our guild mages took a similar list, we can talk about this deck in depth. 45 seconds isn't close to enough to talk about all of this, but I'm just going to run through some of the basics, all right? This mana base, solidified. 22 lands, no Restless Anchorage, 2 basics, 4 reef, 4 coast. If you built a different mana base, I'm just going to say it, you're wrong. Is what it is. 4 Darker Wastes, absolutely not. We're in a cutter meta, we're in a mono red meta. You cannot afford that many pain lands, don't do that shit. Next thing, 3 Tursa, 2-1 split with Winter Night Stories is acceptable. I get that we're aiming for more aggression with Profs by playing the 3rd Tursa. The Legend rule will get you from time to time. We tested this extensively. That 3rd Tursa was a flex slot we were back and forth on constantly. I will take a moment to say I love that there are no Sheltered by Ghosts in the main. I know people love Sheltered by Ghosts, even our team loves Sheltered by Ghosts. Playing Sheltered by Ghosts into the Flood Maw meta is a bad idea. You are going to get blown out by that card. That's why I don't like it right now. With all these different builds just going into Flood Maw as 3 or 4 of for Cutter, Sheltered by Ghosts is such a high-risk card right now.
Absolutely, and it's always kind of had that status, right? So I guess when Standard is getting even more funneled into, you got to deal with Cutter, cards like that can kind of be a liability. But let's talk about a card that everybody says was the anti-Cutter card for a while there, High Noon. We're seeing 3 copies in the sideboard of this. How many other decks does it hit? I know it obviously hits Cutter. Are there some other decks does it hit? Do we want 3 copies in the sideboard? What's the reasoning here for having so many copies?
So High Noon was initially thought to be backbreaking against Cutter, and it can be. It's situational, right? It's kind of like Lockdown versus Cutter. If they don't have Flood Maw to answer it, yeah, it's backbreaking. You're absolutely going to stop them cold in their tracks until they find the Flood Maw. Unfortunately, they have this card called Stock Up that does a really good job of finding that Flood Maw, and this is part of why all these decks that were trying to use Lockdowns, that were trying to use High Noons to keep Cutter in check, were struggling. Because if you get the Plan A versus Plan A, they're winning that, right? Does this High Noon matter elsewhere, though, is really where we're trying to get to. And yes, it does. Against Jeskai Dragons, it shuts Shiko down, right? Now you just have a 4/5 dragon with Vigilance. That's fine. But at the same time, this High Noon will Lava Axe on their end step at some point. So, like, I've had multiple games against Dragons where I play 2 High Noons, and I just sit, and I wait, and I just chip them down to about 10 life, and on their end step, I Lava Axe them, untap, Lava Axe them again, and that's the game. Omni Combo has to get rid of it before they go off. Plain and simple. You can't play Infinite Meringue River Regions. If you play Abuelos into Omni and I get to untap, I get to kill that Omni. So it's pretty good there. And other than that, I don't think it has a whole lot of utility, but it will shut off some other random stuff here and there.
Right, it completely shut down single-handedly the Boros Discovery deck that was out there for a minute, as
There we
I
go.
discovered firsthand.
There we go. Yep.
It cuts down some brews as well. Yeah, but let's go ahead and shift down. That's it for tier 1. Let's go ahead and shift on over to tier 2, where I will start by talking about Orzhov Pixies. John Schindeldecker made it to the semifinals of RC Hartford with Orzhov Pixies, obliterating Cutter opponents and winning that matchup roulette that we've talked about. Let's look at the composition of this deck. Your removal package, I think it recognizes a diversified threat base and standard. You're dealing with a variety of decks still. Majority's Cutter, of course, so you got to have a lot of removal, but the types of removal is still important. We have Get Lost, Go for the Throat, 3 copies of Momentum Breaker, a full set of Nowhere to Run. I could even throw Lauren in there and count that as removal with the way that we're still seeing Artifact Enchantment play. Full copies of Temporary Lockdown. Orzhov Pixies especially likes this card because it can restart their engines, it can get things going again for them, and kind of slow down the opponent as well. We were also seeing the innovation recently of ANXs as your draw engine in this deck. And I also want to point out something I think Darkstream likes as well is the 2 copies of Fortress here. In a neutral board state Mexican standoff situation, this is a good card to have. I like where this card is positioned here in the meta. In summary, I just want to say this deck recognizes low curve threats and mid-range grind at the same time with the way that it's diversified. It's anti threat based. It's removal package.
And it just keeps getting better. I think that list has a lot of evolving that it could still do, Max, especially when the new Final Fantasy set drops. But as I look at the sideboard, there is a card that I look at and I'm like, do we need this still? And that's Liege. Do we still need Wiltleaf Liege?
I'm going to go ahead and say no. And I think there's a few things that point to this. We've committed to the 1 copy of Beza. Beza's kind of your turn the tables kind of card, regain your position in the resource war against the opponent. We're also seeing multiple copies of Annex, right? In the main, we're seeing 2. So it's likely we don't need it. That's your draw engine. That's really what's going to boost you over the top. If they're trying to play Hopeless Nightmare. Even when you sideboard this card in the Liege, any decks carrying Nightmare in the Mirror by post board, if you're playing an open event, they're going to slide those out and they're going to put something else in. Probably something much less risky. So I say Annex makes up for the lack of cards, the cards that you lose in the Resource War Nightmare anyway. Honestly, the other reason is these slots are likely better spent on Cutter, on the Cutter matchup right now anyway. So I would just focus a little bit more on that with the heavy number of Cutter decks we're seeing.
And I'll put the addendum, right? Like, if Cutter gets banned and Esper Pixies comes back, yeah, put the Lieges back in. But when you're running, a mirror match at like 5% of the meta at best, and even then is Hopeless Nightmare gotcha plays really where you want to be? Not so much. You got Beza, as you said. Yeah, I'm with you here. I don't think it's necessary right now. But speaking of cards that may or may not be necessary, let's take a look at Jeskai Dragons with Shiko.
Jeskai Dragons, oh man, it's kind of fallen off since last week, just a little bit, but Toothy did make it to the top 16 of RC Hartford. That's nothing to sneeze at, earning a Pro Tour invite with this deck. So let's take a look at this specific iteration here. We're finally seeing Zurgo Nojitai. So happy to see this card finally find a home in this deck. When I brewed with it week 1, I was like, 3 copies of Zurgo Nojitai, just because I loved how that card was positioned the last time we saw Jeskai Dragons in the meta. It's positioned the same way here, in the sideboard for the control mirror. It does really well against that. We're seeing up to 7 Wrath effects since we last saw this deck. Of course, the 4 lockdowns, the 1 split up, which works pretty well with the authority of the consoles in the sideboard, and the 2 Day of Judgments. We are seeing, I like pointing out the lands here, the utility lands, 1 copy of Quarry Mountain Monastery, really helping you to go over the top in the late game, especially when you're dealing with a control mirror, just being the control deck, trying to stabilize. This card's going to go a long way. We're also seeing a full set of flankers in the sideboard. This is good because control deck can go aggressive with some creatures, or it can take out the graveyard play, which is still very significant right now with both Omni and Oculus using the graveyard. So Jeskai Dragons, I wonder why more people don't pick it up. Maybe it's just the lines are a little hard. Maybe it's an expert level, to play. You want to play your cards just right and do the sequencing correctly. So I suspect that's why, but I think this deck is well positioned, honestly.
Fair. Well, let's talk about where it isn't well positioned for a moment, and let's talk about where it
Yeah.
struggles, because I think that's going to be probably the main reason, right?
Yeah, that's the other reason, right? Considering that we're seeing, the fourth flanker, we're seeing exercise. These are signs. I think the deck struggles against Omni Combo. That might be the matchup that if you want to shore up against that against a specific deck, you might want to shore up against that one. As a lockdown deck, you typically don't worry as much about the hyper aggro, the mono reds. It seems pre-hedged against Cutter. It's got some things for it. We got the 7 board wipes up from 6. We got the full set of Lightning Helix to make things easier on you. Outgain life, last a little longer into the late game, which is what you want with Jeskai Dragons. Omni Combo just comes in and eats your lunch. You've only got 4 counter spells in the main. If they can play around those, and we're seeing a more creature-based Omni Combo as well, so you have to account for that as well. You can't just slide out your temporary lockdowns or slide out your creature hate, your helixes. So that's the matchup we worry about.
Fair. And with it being in tier 1, you can see why Dragons got held in check this last RC. But surprise, surprise, Dimir is back. Let's talk about it.
Zachary Amy made it to the top 32 of RC Hartford, snagging another Pro Tour invite with Dimir Tempo. So let's take a look under the hood here. Talk about the threat base. We've got 4 copies of Cut Down returning to the deck, just full on, respecting the low curve aggro. 3 copies of Go for the Throat as well. And then a little pre-hedge against Cutter, right? This deck, it kind of has a semi-decent matchup against Cutter, typically. It just kind of depends on how things go. But Intimidation Tactics, the 3 Deep Cavern Bats, those are going to go a long way at making sure that you destroy their hand, make them not able to sequence the way that they want in the first few turns. Carsey Revenant has a home here, at least as a one of. I think the one of is correct because you really want this card to be able to renew and hit your other targets. You don't want to have to start with 2 of those in hand. That's kind of awkward. I think Sheldred is probably the ideal target for this, having a flying lifelink Shelly. That's pretty insane. We do have a 3-3 split still, and this split has become pretty standard for the deck, of Kaido to Curiosity. I think those are the cards that the deck is built around. 3-3 split is probably perfect here, especially as that's the draw engine for the deck. So still invested in that.
So Max, traditionally Dimir has struggled against Cutter. Why would you select it in a field that's going to be at least a third Cutter?
So it's a little bit of a complex, nuanced answer here, but I think ultimately what this deck wants to do is maintain a 50% matchup with Cutter, at least get to that point in its particular build. And we're kind of seeing that with the recent builds of Dimir Tempo, trying to shore up against sort of Cutter's inevitability, if you will, disrupt them early and then hope that they don't pick up speed fast enough to be able to race with you. And that's mostly how those matchups go. So you have a 50% shot there, and then that's the variance, and then the certainty comes from being able to beat the rest of the field, right? If you have decks coming in that are specifically trying to target Cutter, this deck wants to be able to utilize its tools to beat them. 3-3 Curiosity Kaido split, that's pretty crazy against some of the other lists. Ultimately, I think that's the deck's goal. I think the secondary issue here is, though, we're seeing less post-board versus Oculus or Domain, and that's really where the strength of the deck is in this week's iteration. So I just want to say, as a note to the viewers out there, be mindful of how you're slotting, how you're doing your flex slots. Pay attention to your local metas. The meta's the event that you're about to go into. Use your data and figure out how you want to slot, because this deck has the potential to go full-on, try to win that matchup against Cutter, or it can go full-on trying to win the Oculus Omni Combo kind of matchup. So just be mindful of that and don't overboard for, something that's not going to be as present at your event.
Well, speaking of a deck that's unlikely to be as present at your event, if for no other reason than the cost of the damn thing, let's talk about Zur's Domain.
You're not kidding with the cost. I bought this deck and I kind of regret it. But nonetheless, Avi Lazur was the sole Domain player to place in the top 64 of RC Hartford, though notably they didn't snag that Pro Tour invite. So let's take a look at where this deck ended up. I want to say this deck is pretty much solved, right? There's a few flex slots. It can tune itself to the meta a little bit. It can shore up against the hyper aggro, but it hasn't done a great job of that. You do have full lockdowns. That's pretty much a must or requirement now with the deck. You got 2 days of judgments, 6 total possible wrath effects in the main board. Main board High Noon also helps. That helps a little bit. You've got several other copies in the sideboard as well here. I want to say the one Rakshasa's Bargain That's the spice in the sideboard. It does trigger Beanstalk. It has a stock up like effect, so you get it's kind of like an upgraded stock up in a sense, I want to say. The 3 more High Noons in the sideboard try to shore up that Cutter matchup post board. I think that's very critical right now. But unfortunately, I think the issue with the deck is there's nothing innovative going on here. You know what to expect when you face Domain. You really got to go underneath, so you're going to mulligan aggressively. I think pilots, especially at RC's Pro Tour, I think they're going to know what to do against this deck, both pre-board and post-board. So I think that's part of the issue here.
So honestly, was this the final gasp of life for Domain before rotation, in your opinion?
Yeah, like I said, it feels like it just has very little ways to go. The flex slots do shift based on the meta, and we're starting to see it shift towards hyper aggro, towards the last bit here. But of all the decks, all the lockdown decks, especially the go large decks, so to speak, that want to ramp, that want to go big, the issues still remain for this deck. Its mana base a lot of times causes it to self-defeat, as you've noted in the past. Without proper draws, other decks find a way to go underneath. A little bit of bad variance, and you're kind of stuck losing that game 1 against hyper aggro. And there's still a lot of hyper aggro out there. They remain in the meta. Domain just doesn't have a way to deal with it effectively and consistently. Omni and Jeskai Dragons have also likely taken the place of where this deck once stood. Those decks are proven to be able to control against hyper aggro to a better degree. So this deck, however, is kind of board state dependent. If you board wipe all their stuff, if you get rid of their enchantments, that's kind of it. You get rid of Zur, that's kind of it. So it's very dependent on the board state, and for that reason, I think it doesn't do as well as those other.
Yeah, it's hard to take turns off when you look at those first 2 decks over there on the tier 1 list, and you're like, oh, so they all play Monstrous Rage. Well, guess I shouldn't skip 2 turns out of the first 3 with tap lands. It's a little rough when you pull that card. But, exactly. That's fine, because we got Brews, and we're going to check out Brewer's Corner, favorite segment every week. Max, let's kick things off, and let's see where the spice actually is this week. Bant Enchantress.
Let's go. Bant is back, baby. Bant Enchantress especially. Now, this reminds me of the glory days of Selesnya Enchantress. And the big reminder of that is the fact that Calyx is still in the meta. So, we've got a full set of these in here. Look, Andrew Skolnick, 3rd in a 36-player oversized event at RC Hartford, did well with this version of the deck. This deck is just a low curve enchantment based aggro. It's really what it wants to do. It's going to hit its cards pretty consistently. You've got 3 copies of Ethereal Armor, 3 copies of Audacity. They're going to boost your creatures significantly, give you the ability to draw off their removal. Full set of Glimmers, make your enchantments even cheaper. And with Calyx, that can get really out of hand really quickly. I mean, that can snowball. Unable to Scream, Get Lost, the Sheltered by Ghosts, those are going to make up your removal package. All of those, minus the Get Lost, are enchantment based, and they're going to add to your enchantment total. We've got the spice here too: 2 copies of Hall Creeper, 3 copies of Enduring Innocence. When you combine those together, your Hall Creepers can eventually become copies of Enduring Innocence. Huge draw engines. Unblockable copy of Innocence, that can get pretty wild and out of hand. Like I said, this deck snowballs really well. Entity Trackers, Optimistic Scavengers, those are making up your payoffs. So Standard is in a spot where Enchantress wanted to be a deck. I don't know how it's going to pan out in the future with Final Fantasy coming, but I think there's room here for it based on some of the cards and spoilers I've seen.
Like, part of me thinks that Lockdown crushes this, and the other part's like, I mean, you've got Calyx and Entity Tracker and Enduring Innocence, and like that's 10 ways to say, all right, you can reset the board, we're going to keep rolling anyway. It's not a big deal, we'll just draw out of it. So I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say, but I definitely want to mess around with that list a little bit. But let's move it right along. Let's talk about Orzhov Midrange. All right. Thanks to Anthony Boxleiter grabbing 4th in the 36-player oversized event at SCG Hartford with this beauty. And I know this you look at this list and you're like, why this? This is kind of demons, but like, why this list? Because it plays Friction Sensor in the main, and I love that this was the first person to look at this and go, what if High Noon was a creature? Like, what if all those monks came into play tapped? You know, what if there just wasn't a way for them to have aggression and we can punch them right back? And this is kind of what I've been saying about the issue of High Noon and Lockdown, is you stop the board state, but you don't do any aggressive thing, right? You are giving them time to rebuild and answer what you've done. Whereas cards like Censor, go, okay, we're going to stop the board state, and I'm going to hit you like a bolt every turn until you answer this. And in the meantime, you have ways to develop and get very aggressive with Shellys, Arc Fiends, etc. So I really like that this is the first build I've seen that says, okay, we're going to disrupt the early game. We get to the mid game, we're taking over. And they're going to have to answer every single one of these threats in the mid game, or we're running them the hell over. That's where I want to be right now.
That card is the spice. I mean, it's an authority of the consoles combined with a high noon, combined with a body. Like,
right?
That's wild to me that we dug this out of obscurity. But yeah, wow. Credit to Anthony for building that one up.
Absolutely. And with that, Max, you got some more spice in your way. Let's talk about Mardu Control.
Jesus Ramos, third place in a 56-player LCQ at SCG Hartford. Nice. With Mardu, nonetheless, Mardu colors have access to all kinds of board wipes. All the board wipes that matter, as far as I know. So, tuning for the meta, if you can fine-tune this deck right here, it may be specific what you do, how many copies, but it's possible with this shell to really outdo Hyper Aggro. 3 main board copies of Authority of the Consoles, also just mindful of low-curve Hyper Aggro. We've got Annex, we've got Beza, we've got Elspeth. These are going to make up the chunk of your threat base from this control deck. But you've also got Flanker, you've got Lauren. They serve supplementary roles, a little bit of removal, graveyard hate, but also their creatures, their bodies. And that's starting to become more and more important as these control shells start to come out of the woodwork in response to the meta. So lots of removal. Inevitable defeat at 4-mana value is highlighted here as full set. 3 drain is nothing to sneeze at, and over time that can sort of help you to tack on the damage, make climbing the hill of beating your opponent not that hard once you stabilize. So credit to Jesus Ramos for coming up with a control list, none of the colors of which are blue.
I mean, this was just so clever too, right? You have 8 Helix effects in the main. That's fantastic. I love that they have consoles going into lockdown, because you can just tuck one under a lockdown, and if they bounce the lockdown, your monks are coming into play tapped, and I'm replaying the stupid lockdown. You know what I mean? Like, you don't actually get ahead in that scenario unless you have 2 into the Flood Maws. So I love how clever that list was. Just props, Jesus. You really nailed it on that one. Let's go to the last one, though. Last bit of spice. Grixis Oculus. Alrighty, folks. So what happens if we get rid of white and we just play No One Left Behind, so we get the untapped Oculus instead? And then we also get to mess around with this card called Evangel of Synthesis that gives us an additional 4 FOMO effects to a degree. Like, that is a lot of draw discard to go with Profts, a lot of creatures to pull back with No One Left Behind, and you even get to play Alicia, who laughs at fate. This card is sneaky good. If you don't have copies of this card, I would get at least 2 to 3 in the near future. This raid effect with anything aggro, it forces your opponent to operate on 2 axes, and that's where you want to be. Right? You want to be in a spot where they have to kill the creature that's attacking, but they also need to kill it before you even swing, or else you get a raid trigger on post-combat and you just bring it right the hell back. So it does such an effective job of messing with your opponent's ability to sequence. And it's sneaky. As a 1 or a 2 of, your opponent's not going to think about it, and then next thing you know, they're getting wrecked by it. Let's also remember that this reanimates Oculus. With 1/1/1 counter, it's bringing Oculus out of the graveyard for you. Spicy. Very spicy. Well done. Ryan Clune, 5th place in a 42-player LCQ at SCG Hartford, that pulled that off. That was just clever as hell. Wow. It's been too long since Fable and Invoke Despair. It's time to bring it back, damn it. We're bringing it back.
Yes. Agreed.
And with that, we're going to get to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, Max, we've looked at 12 archetypes in our recap. What are you going to be playing going into Week 7 of Dragonstorm Standard?
All right. It's been about 5-6 weeks. I'm going back to an archetype that's been revised, Rule Vehicles. So last time I tried this archetype, I was a little bit sloppy. I threw in a bunch of ramp. I tried to make it work. This time we've got a plan. So, of course, we're going to start with this build, including the exhaust package. That's Draconautics Engineer and Afterburner Expert. There's a bunch of 4-power synergies here laid throughout the deck. Afterburner Expert, getting that back into play can help you quite a bit, especially when you consider Herd Heirloom, and Garruk's Uprising. Those are going to create some payoffs for that. give you card advantage with this deck. This deck was missing before. Bristleblood Farmer's food tokens can be synergized really well with Chandra here, her +2 ability, in case they, take out your Bristleblood Farmer. And just being able to repeat with the World Wagon, that can be devastating and put constant pressure on your opponent. One of our payoffs here that's new, Dragonhawk, providing card advantage and damage turn after turn. If you can't play the cards that are exiled, they become damage to your opponent turn after turn. Uprising also gives World Wagon Trample, which is one of the things I think the card was missing, it not having Trample. It didn't allow to add enough pressure. People could chump block it. But with Garruk's Uprising, I think that adds some oomph to the deck. The key here is that the deck wants to constantly pressure the opponent. You want to have good payoffs, and if you're a ramp deck, you want to pay attention to what you're ramping to. So I'm just going to note one thing. Main board or pre-board, we're doing the 3 copies of Nissa, that -7. That can win you the game right off the rip. But post-board, if you're facing down a lot of artifacts and enchantments, the Cutter decks, Domain, you can swap out a couple of those Nissas for 2 copies of Ugin. That is still a 7 mana value card. You can swap out for the Mites, the Stone Brains, the Ghost Vacuums, all notably low-cost artifacts, which will set off Ugin's ability. So sometimes, like I like to tell people, for a while people, content creators were making ramp decks to get to Ugin. Sometimes Ugin's enough. You don't need necessarily those artifacts to go with him, because that +3, that +3 life, draw a card, that can be devastating in a late game, scenario where you're both top decking. So Ugin might just be enough, but with all these low cost artifacts, I think there's something there post board.
Fair. Well, I'm not going to pretend like this is going to be the most original thing in the book, but I'll move it right along and tell you that my deck is Gruul Delirium, aka Gruul Delulu.
We both went Gruul.
We did. So this is the build that I ended up on. It's done extremely well against Cutter. It's got some problem areas in other matchups, but I wanted something that was just going to go after Cutter, and this is that deck, right? So for those who are unaware of a lot of how this works, one of the main combos you get to pull off in this deck, and it happens way more often than you think, is getting Keen-Eyed Curator to swing with Delirium. You hit a Violent Urge, and then after you Violent Urge, you exile enough cards to give it +4/+4 and Trample, thus making it an 8/7 with double strike and Trample. Make sure you cast the Urge before you lose Delirium. It does not work if you do it the wrong way. Sequencing is important in all aspects of life, but especially here. Outside of that, why I like this deck. Patchwork Beastie is so good when everyone's trying to play Torches, everybody's trying to play Burst Lightnings, like force the bargain if they're going to do it, but otherwise they're just going to leave it alone and it's going to accumulate value. This deck does have nut draws where you get to go turn 1 Beastie into turn 2 breakout FOMO, discard, hit exactly Delirium, swing for 8 on turn 2, and I have done that a couple times. It feels insane when it happens. So this deck just does a great job against a Cutter meta of punching back hard while still having ways to disrupt what they're doing with, for instance, Curator just pulling stuff out so Stormchaser's talent can't bring it back, Screaming Nemesis just being good against other aggro decks and forcing them into awkward positions, and the mere fact that this races, because Cutter needs to take a little time off to get Cutter and establish that board presence, and you don't. You just start attacking immediately.
Yeah, this deck is dangerous. I know we talked about, there's other hyper aggro, why not just play this or that. I think Delirium is in a special spot, kind of between Swarm and sort of like the hyper aggro rage list. This list has some potential. I've played it on ladder. I recommend y'all try it out for real. The Gruul Delirium is real.
It's a lot of fun, and I will say it's in Coffee and Grinders sideboard guide, so if you're subscribed to that, enjoy. Your guide's there. I taught you exactly how to deal with Cutter. You'll do well.
Oh yeah, go check that out. If you're not already a member of Coffee and Grinders, go ahead and sign up down the join button below. And that's it. Another week in the books. We've got just one more episode before the end of our analysis on Tarkir Dragonstorm Standard. It's been a hell of a lot of fun. Wish I could have seen more dragons, but I'm glad there was a dragon list in the top 2 tiers that we were able to put on display for you. So, look, who's going to come out on top next week? Is Cutter still going to be the deck? Or will all these RCs have taught people how to pilot against it? Tune in next week to find out.
Last but not least, please like, share, and comment on this video to show support for your community. We appreciate having all of you here. And until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.